Hello, hello, this is Rachel from Old Town, Maine, and you're listening to Tiffany Bond on Two Broads Talking Politics.
Are you listening?
Hey everyone, this is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and I'm here special end of the year episode with returning guest Tiffany Bond. Hi Tiffany.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so thanks for coming back on. Any of our new listeners probably didn't hear our earlier episode with you, which was, I don't know, sometime last spring. So Tiffany ran for Congress in the Maine 2nd District this year, was on the November ballot, not as a Democrat or a Republican, but as an independent. And so I believe you are our only non-Democratic candidate we had on out of 170 some candidates. So special distinction for you. So let's start by talking a little bit about your run for Congress and some of the unique aspects of it. So how did you first decide you wanted to run for Congress?
Well, it was all horrible, right? I mean, I was, as you said, I am an independent, so there's benefits and detriments to that. I see a lot of the flaws of both parties. I also see goodness in both parties. I think that maybe today we're in sort of a weird, exaggerated space, but if you look back historically, especially if you're looking at the very hyper-local level, I can look at the Republican Party, for example, and I can say, look, especially on a local level, and I'm taking federal out of this because federal has been skewed for a long time. I can say, I see your conservative values and that you really see financial prudence as a virtue, for example, that you live a very fiscally conservative life. I can see that you are a very private person, that you sort of want the government out of your business. And I think that a lot of the Republicans, especially in Maine, are sort of libertarian leaning in that extent, not in everything, but just they sort of want a hands-off government. Mm-hmm. And I can look at the Democrat Party and see, hey, I think it's great that you point out a lot of the social issues that are maybe not getting resolved, and we should be working together collaboratively. So I sort of fall politically in the middle of the spectrum. And I don't think we need a whole Congress of moderates, but we could use a few. We're short on moderates these days. Yes. Maybe just a handful to get everybody talking again. And I don't fully align with either party. And independents aren't weird in Maine. We have a lot of independent candidates. We have a very famous independent senator, Angus King. We have enough independents in our state legislature that they have staff and offices. So it's not strange to be an independent here. In Maine, it's sort of where the moderates have gone. You're too left or you're too right. And if you were to go out collecting signatures, which we have to do to get on the ballot, you would hear, hi, I'm collecting signatures. I'm running for office. Would you like to help me get on the ballot? Are you a registered voter? The first question you're going to hear is, well, are you a Republican or a Democrat? Mm-hmm. And for me, I would say I'm an independent, and almost 100% of the time, the answer I would get back is, oh, me too, or, oh, I'm an independent, but I registered for Party X for the primaries. Mm-hmm. So that people really see themselves as independent here. So I looked at the field and who was jumping in, and there were a bunch of Democrats. There was only one Republican because there was an incumbent. There was a Libertarian. There was a Green. It was a very wide field. But it was 11 middle-aged white dudes that weren't particularly qualified for what Congress does. And I think a lot of people don't really know what Congress does. So that's part of the problem. So Congress, especially the House specifically, is very focused on driving federal law bills, and including the budget. The budget is a bill. And so it's kind of a nerd job. That's not what we've made it, but that's what it should be. And so I have to read federal law as a part of my job. I also genuinely enjoy it. I started doing it in law school. So I've been doing it for 10 years. Don't invite me to cocktail parties. I'll start going over tax code with you, and you don't want to hear it. And I just watched guy after guy after guy, and I think they were all in it for the right reasons, right? Like I want to be engaged in civic discourse. I feel like our country's on the wrong path. I'm going to run for Congress. but none of them really knew how to read a bill, which was problematic. And that included the incumbent, which was also very problematic. As a family lunch, and he was voting for a lot of stuff that was making my job hard, right? Things like work requirements on federal aid. That sounds like a great idea, but what it really does is it disproportionately punishes people with undiagnosed disabilities or conditions that don't fit the check boxes for exceptions. And, I'd personally rather have a few extra people get food stamps that maybe don't, air quote, deserve them, than punish people with an undiagnosed disability or somebody taking care of a friend or family member who has a genuine disability but doesn't quite meet the qualifications. It puts a bad burden on people. So a lot of those bills were getting voted for. I was getting frustrated, and I'm watching all these middle-aged white dudes, and it was either 11 or 12. It really depends on what you call a candidate, because in Maine, you can't actually become an FEC filed, ready to go candidate in a meaningful way with knowing you're going to be on the ballot, or at least on a primary ballot, until January 1 of the election year, because you have to gather signatures, but you can't do it before January 1. So a lot of people were, FEC filed real candidates, and some people were just, I'm going to run. But it was 11 or 12 guys, and I was like, it's 2018. We got to have a woman. So I decided to run. And the field did thin a little bit, but it just became increasingly clear with all the candidates that I interacted with that most of them were really, genuinely nice guys. Congress wasn't just a super fit for them. So we have this new voting system here. It's the first time it was used in a federal election, called ranked choice voting, and that got a lot of airtime towards the end because it was meaningful, and it's a different way to elect people. And my race specifically, so there were 3 races in the state that were run using ranked choice voting, and the primaries were also run using ranked choice voting. And I'll dig into what ranked choice voting is in a little bit if that comes up as your question, but the race I was in just happened to be the perfect test case for it. And it also gave me a lot of flexibility to run a different campaign. So I thought, okay, I'm running for office. I really hate the job interview. Let's make it different and better. And I think that you got to experience some of that on your podcast. We didn't do any of the same stuff. I took every single thing that I hated about politics and I replaced it with something better, or that I believe to be better. For example, lawn signs are really expensive and horrible for the environment and obnoxious to pick up, and who likes them? They're awful. So instead I had window signs you could download online, mindful of the fact that a lot of our district is on dial-up, so they were, not huge files, and you would just print out one sheet of paper on a regular 8.5 by 11 printer and tape it in your window. I needed to replace commercials because I can't stand commercials, and mailers and door knocking. So I introduced Maine raising, which the intent was to get the word of mouth but not actually touch the money. I actually ran my entire congressional campaign for under $800. So I ended up coming in at a little under a nickel a voter. And to do that, I said, hey, don't give me money. Instead, do either a charity Maine raising, which I would focus on different things like domestic violence or food insecurity, write Tiffany Bond for Congress on the check, or write it in the memo if you're donating online. The goal with that was to create a replacement for commercials. So I thought I would end up as special interest stories or earned media. For that portion, I did sort of underestimate misogyny, which was a fun experience this year. If I went through and told me what I experienced this last year with regards to misogyny without having experienced it, I would think I needed like a tinfoil hat and a really good therapist. Because it's surreal. I didn't understand how bad it was. I live in a very insulated world from that because I'm self-employed and I work in an area of law that's dominated by women. So I don't get the exposure that most people do to that sort of environment. And then the other thing that I wanted to replace was, the door knocking and the mailers. And so I had people go shop at small businesses and leave a note about the campaign and say, hey, Tiffany Bond won't take my money, but she told me to go support a small business. Look her up. And I got a variety of notes that were sent to me and products that were shared on social media, and small business owners calling me and emailing me, who are you? Why am I getting business from you? You're the first person running for Congress who's ever cared about me. So I tried really hard to replace a lot of the things about politics that are just awful, right? We don't want the corrupting influence of money. Who likes the gross commercials? Who likes the lawn signs? And I tried to really focus it back on what the job was. I would go online and I would do live bill readings of bills that bothered me. In the debates, the men would be bickering over who was lying. And I would say, can we talk about policy or question? Like, I'd really like to talk to you about something that has something to do with his job instead of name calling. This is ridiculous. So it was just a very different way to run a campaign. I didn't anticipate that I would win. Because I was figuring it out on the fly, I anticipated that I would develop a system and test a model for how to use ranked choice voting for people, whether they're independent or party-based, to get out of this awful world that we've created for elections. And I was able to do that successfully. For a lot of people, the marker of a real campaign is 3%. I got 5.7% of the vote, and I spent under $800, and I thought that was pretty meaningful.
Yeah. So I want to come back to the ranked choice in a minute, but I also want to talk a little bit about how hard it is to get on the ballot as an independent without sort of party support. Because I interacted with you and watched you on social media trying to get your signatures. So how many signatures did you have to collect to get on the ballot?
So you have to collect a minimum of 2,000 for Congress, but Maine has a quirky system. So it's multi-step. It's a pretty intense process. So, and it's not hard. It's just annoying, and it drives volunteers away. So I underestimated how challenging it would be to get volunteers to do this. And again, it's not hard once you get doing it, but I never collected signatures before, so I had no idea what to expect. So the process is you go collect as many signatures as you can. And if you're an independent, they can be from either political party. I know there's some people trying to start new political parties in Maine, and it is intensely difficult to start a new political party in Maine because your signatures, if you're running for office, can only be from people in your geographic district, whether it's a congressional district or a local race. And they have to be from members of your own party if you have a party, which is why we have a very two-party dominated system here. In fact, the Libertarian Party lost standing because they couldn't get enough voters in this last election. So, but as an independent, you can get any registered voter to sign. They do have that same geographic boundary. They have to be in the district, and they have to be a registered valid voter. But you need to get twice as many. So a party voter running for or a party candidate running for Congress needs 1,000 votes to be on the ballot for the primary, and a independent needs 2,000, but they go straight to ballot. However, you collect the votes. You can only collect votes for each town on one sheet. So you can have multiple sheets for the same town, but say you're collecting signatures for Belfast and Rumford. Belfast and Rumford have to be on two separate sheets. And then when you're done collecting, you have to go find a notary to swear that you collected them. You can't share the sheets between people. Only one person can collect for each sheet. You can't leave the sheets unattended. You can't just pass them around. You have to supervise them the entire time. And then once they're notarized, you either hand deliver them to the town, or if you have sufficient time, you mail them to the town that has those voters. They check the signatures and the voter rolls to verify they're all valid voters that have signed your petition. And then you do that over and over and over and over and over again until you have enough signatures to meet the minimum. And then you take them to the state. But at the state, they can still disqualify signatures. So if you need 2,000 signatures, you really need 3,000 signatures, or at least 2,500. I think I had 2,700. So when you go to the state, if they throw out any petitions, and they can be thrown out for very minor deficiencies, like if it's not clear what year the notary signed, or if they missed part of the date, or if their stamp didn't go on right, or if you signed in the wrong spot, or there's a variety of things. Any technical deficiencies, they bounce your petitions for. So that we don't have a lot of ballot fraud because it's very difficult. We did have one guy this year though that had a whole bunch of dead people, and he got kicked off the rolls. He was short by like 5 or 10 signatures for running for Senate. So that was very scandalous here, but it's a very rare thing, and they catch most of it because it is a multi-step process. So getting on the ballot is a chore. I collected most of my signatures. I collected, I think it was 1,663 was the exact number. I could be off by a couple of numbers. I haven't looked it up for a while, and I haven't said it for a while, but it was over 1,600 signatures I collected myself. I did have some volunteers. My mom came and helped, which was nice. And I definitely, if I ever run for office again, I'm not going to be like, ooh, I'll wait till the snow melts and do it then, I would like January 2nd, I'm getting signatures because it is a really intense process. And you really can't rely on other people because there are so many steps. It's a lot to ask a volunteer to do. And I didn't have any paid staff. A lot of people pay for their signatures. They hire people to go out and collect them. And I didn't do that. It is a pretty daunting process to get on the ballot here. Every state has different requirements. But it was a lot of time. It definitely had an impact on my business because I had to scale back how many clients I could take just so I could go get signatures.
Yeah, and the Maine 2nd District is a pretty spread out place. You know, I live in Chicago, and you could get 2,000 signatures in not too many days, probably just standing on the corner. You know, 2,000 people would walk past you, but not so much in the Maine 2nd District.
Yeah. No, we have 375 municipalities, mostly towns, not cities. We only have a handful of cities. And it is spread out over an enormous geographic area. It is one of the largest congressional districts. I think it's the second largest congressional district east of the Mississippi, or it might actually be the largest. It's one of the most rural districts in the country. So it's a really huge, really spread out district with a lot of towns that have like 200 people. So, you know, you can go to each town once or twice, and then you're really not going to get any more signatures. So it requires a lot of legwork. You know, the biggest towns in this district are like 30,000 people.
So then let's dig into ranked choice a little bit, because I know there was a lot of concern by a lot of people around the country that independents running in this particular election year were going to ruin the chances of the blue wave happening. You mentioned you were using ranked choice in the Maine election, and so it actually meant that you being on the ballot did not hurt the Democrats' chances, and in fact probably helped his chances. Can you talk a little bit about what the heck was going on?
Yeah, so ranked choice voting, kind of the most basic way to describe it is if you were to tell a child, you know, like, hey, we're going to get ice cream. What kind of ice cream do you want? And they would say, well, I want chocolate, but if you don't have chocolate, I'll get pistachio. And if you don't have pistachio, I'll take strawberry. And if you don't have strawberry, you know, I guess I'll take mint, right? And you can even do a write-in as your first choice. So you could say, well, I know they don't have it, but I want superpowered bubblegum. And, you know, so you can really put out your wish for the universe. And if it just doesn't manifest because it's not on the ballot, then you know, we had 4 candidates on the ballot and a 5th slot for a write-in. So you just sort of rank people in the order that you want them, and the order that you find them acceptable and palatable. And you don't have to rank anyone you don't find palatable. So if there's somebody on the ballot that you just think should not be touching federal law, you don't have to put them there. You can opt out. So the way that it works is they go through, and if somebody gets 50%, and that happened in both the Senate race, Angus King got 50%, over 50%. And it also happened in the other House race. Shelley Pingree got over 50%. So they just won, right? Because they got a majority. In the race in the 2nd congressional district, neither the Democrat nor the Republican had a sufficient amount of votes to win by reaching that 50% threshold. So what happened is Will Hoare, who was the 4th place, got eliminated. And actually, I was batch eliminated because it was mathematically impossible for me to win. And I got eliminated. And anybody who put Will or me as their first choice or their second choice, you know, if we took the 1 or 2 slots, we were essentially taken out of that space, and they just went down the list of what people picked until they got to a candidate that was still standing. And it ended up being Jared Golden, the Democrat, who took more than 50% in that round. So Bruce Poliquin in the first round had a couple thousand more than Jared Golden, and then Jared Golden ended up with like 3,000 more in the final round. And I ran as an independent, and I was a true independent. I didn't endorse either candidate. I didn't participate in supporting either campaign. I ran a bona fide real campaign as if I were running something like some sort of patsy candidate. So it was a true, at least 3-way race. We had a 4th person. Will didn't have a whole lot of campaign activity. He actually had less than half the votes that I had. So it was really nice because it actually created a law court case where they could say, hey, I want to appeal to, it was actually federal, not state. I want to appeal to the federal district court. And he first filed for the counting to be stopped and for him to be declared a winner. But that's sort of like playing Monopoly for 13 hours and be like, psych, we're really playing Risk. Because we're like, but the rules were printed on the ballot. You're just saying to change the rules after everybody voted? No, it doesn't work like that. The court denied that. And actually that order came very shortly before they declared the ranked choice winner, which ended up being Jared Golden. He continued the lawsuit basically saying that ranked choice voting gives people more than one vote, and it doesn't. It gives people one vote per round. They just might vote for the same person in multiple rounds. So we call it ranked choice voting, and it's probably more accurately described as an instant runoff vote. And what happened is anybody who voted for me or Will first that wanted to give us a chance, that wanted to try something new, what they did is they got the ability to do that. And then if they didn't want the other guy, they could still say, well, I really like Tiffany, but gosh, I just can't stand the Republican, or, the Democrat doesn't work for me. So I can vote for the one, if I have to pick between the lesser of two evils, I still have that choice. If it goes to ranked choice, if neither one of them gets 50%. So if either one of them had gotten 50%, it wouldn't have mattered because it would have just been like any other election. But what it did is it gave people the ability to have the backup of another round and to make sure that we really got a majority rule. So in the past, Maine has used plurality, which is whoever gets the most votes in one round of voting wins. But then you can end up with people who win with like 30% of the vote. I think Governor LePage was really the inspiration for ranked choice voting in the state. The people who liked Governor LePage really, really, really liked him. And the people who didn't like Governor LePage felt exactly the opposite.
So it was kind of fun. I, along with apparently 2,000 other people, watched the Facebook live feed of the Maine Secretary of State running the sort of second round.
I was watching too. It was fun, wasn't it? It was like watching your grandmother figure out like how to use Excel.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be a pretty big election nerd to want to watch people like on screen doing Excel. I also felt really bad for the person whose like every move on Excel is being broadcast to, the world. But it was neat, and it was really it was sort of shockingly transparent, right? Like you could actually understand this is what's happening, and we're watching it happen in real time. And, there was even this sort of, I don't remember, I think it was Jared Golden, whose name had been one way in the sort of first round position, another way in the second round position. They had to correct that. And, but I think it was really neat to sort of watch how democracy works and how voting works. And
right.
It was a good civics lesson.
It was so Maine, right? I mean, we have a really good Secretary of State. There's nothing creepy about him. He happens to be a Democrat with a good sense of humor. But, I mean, we really are fortunate that we have a pretty good group of folks in Maine that are really very committed to democracy. We certainly have some struggles with citizens' initiatives here, and there's a lot of people, and it's not necessarily just Republicans. It is both parties, although perhaps not equally weighted, that have taken citizens' initiatives and been like, oh, well, you're really smart when you vote for us, but less smart when you vote for these things. We've had that with ranked choice voting. We had that with Maine Care expansion. We had that with retail marijuana sales. So, I mean, we certainly have some conflicts with our state legislators, but all in all, I think everybody in Maine is fairly well-intentioned. We don't have a lot of nefarious actors here. So you do really get to see, at the end of the day, you'll have the most conservative person and a very, very liberal person, and they'll go get a drink together, right? Like we are still fairly cordial here in Maine, at least on the local level. One of the things that did surprise me is both the Republican and the Democrat had some pretty outrageous ads, and I really expected them to be better behaved in the debates, and they were not. So that was an interesting thing, because I think everybody that I talked to who watched the debates were like, wow, we weren't really expecting that. We thought they'd be grown up. So that was a little hard. I mean, the Democrat was fairly pleasant in person, one-on-one. I didn't have a chance to talk to Bruce Poliquin one-on-one, but just in that setting, I was expecting, a member of acting member of Congress to act like an acting member of Congress, and he acted like not an acting member of Congress. So that was interesting. There were certainly a few moments that were very 2018 during the race.
What kind of feedback have you been getting then? I mean, essentially your votes ended up, the people who selected you in the first position, their second place votes ended up deciding the race. But what sort of feedback have you been getting from people about the way you ran your race and the types of things you were doing and how you were spending money, not spending money? Are people receptive to that?
Well, so it's funny. So before the election happened, I was getting a lot of pressure from Democrats saying things that I just found to be totally inappropriate. I was sworn at in front of my children. I was told that it was my responsibility to drop out and endorse the Democrat who is, younger and I feel less qualified and male. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. It just seemed silly to demand that I drop out because of that. And the Democrats were actually really mean. All the mean things I had said to me in advance of the election came from Democrats, and the Republicans were really respectful and kind. It has been a much smaller contingent of Republicans on the backside that have been exponentially less kind since the ranked choice voting did essentially, it ended up with the Democrat winning. But here's the thing, it really doesn't favor either party. I think what it does is it disfavors incumbents because it gives you more people who can make valid criticisms from different perspectives at ranked choice voting. And I think, they can come at the incumbent in different ways using ranked choice voting and saying, look, if I don't win, I just fall out of the race and it's like I wasn't even here. You can vote for anybody else. It's a very difficult system to game. So I didn't anticipate going into it the amount of friction I would receive from not all Democrats. Some Democrats were very supportive of a broadening of voices and more Democratic involvement, but it almost exclusively came from the Democrat side before the election. After the election, there was a little bit of residual, oh, you're grandstanding, and a little bit from the Republicans kicked up and, that I had somehow manipulated them and manipulated the race, and it was not true. They took a quote that I said out of context where said, basically, hey, I'm trying out a new system that I can do in ranked choice voting, and they took that as I'm stumping for the Democrat, and it's definitely not true. Towards the end, I found the Democrat and the Republican to be fairly indistinguishable to me in their strategies and methods and approachability, so I didn't actually see there to be much distinction between the two, and I've gotten a little bit of pushback for that, but, I was sitting on a stage at the first debate, and Kavanaugh was literally getting sworn in for the third time, like some sort of bad celebrity wedding. And I'm sitting next to two men who are fighting over who Susan Collins likes more. And then it cuts to an ad of the Democrat, like drinking beer with a bro. And I'm like, how am I in this is 2018? What satire am I trapped in here? So, I did get a lot of pushback when I said I really didn't distinguish much between the Democrat and the Republican in my race, but a lot of it was from men who just they're like, what do you mean that their women aren't represented in this race at all? And I'm like, no, really, there's like, if you're a woman or if you're a minority or if, you've got any sort of special needs, if you have a disability, if you are GLBTQ, like you are just not present in this race. It's just not there. This is a male, middle-class, white, bro, gun-toting election. It was surreal. So as far as reaction I've gotten since then, it's sort of similar to what I had before. I was shocked, and I made a comment about the misogyny earlier. No one talked about me. The people who found my campaign and liked it, loved it. It was cool. It was innovative. It supported our community. It focused on real issues. We talked about real things. We didn't do a lot of name calling. There wasn't a lot of snark. I've got a pretty snarky sense of humor, but I tried to keep it out of actual political issues. And a lot of the regular media just didn't cover it at all. And that was really surprising to me. And I said earlier, I'm a family law attorney, especially in southern Maine, but certainly throughout Maine. We have a lot of female magistrates. We have a lot of female judges, predominantly women working in family law. So it was shocking to me when I would talk to somebody who is an attorney who knew about federal law, with 4 degrees, who actually knows the issues and what's being talked about and knows how they impact people, right? If we're talking about TANF, if we're talking about food stamps, if we're talking about the ACA, I know how this is impacting people because I see it when they're going through divorce. I just wouldn't get covered. They wouldn't say my name. There was CNN did a post where they covered Bruce, Jared, and Will, but they left my name out. So I, kind of said something on social media like, hey, do you think you can mention my name? That'd be pretty super. And they went back in. They didn't note that they'd updated the article, and they just removed Will. And so they'd rather delete a man than mention a woman. It was surreal. I've never felt invisible before. I'm a pretty private person, and so I've never had a huge social media presence until this. But I couldn't get people to say my name. They just literally wouldn't mention me in articles, whether it was a national or a local level. I would get called an independent or a competitor. Or they just didn't say my name. It was so strange. They'd say everybody else's name but mine. There was one moment where after the first debate, I had said, this is why we're not getting anything done, after the gentlemen had been bickering and calling each other liars. And so that was used as a headline for an article, but it didn't cite me. And so I had a man quote me to me and say if I was a straight shooter like one of the other men, he picked one of the men he had assigned that quote to, I'd probably win. And I was like, well, that's my quote. And he was like, it's really unbecoming to take credit for other people's work. And I was like, no, I'm going to make you watch this video. And then he was like, oh. So it was surreal that I was erased. So I think that was the hardest thing about running as a woman. And I know it wasn't just because I was an independent, because I heard it from other female candidates who were Democrat. I didn't happen to interact with any women who were running who were Republican, but I did interact with some women who were running who were Democrats, especially before the primaries. And women were just having a really hard time getting covered, which is strange in this year. I mean, this was supposed to be the year of the woman. So even in a year where women are coming out on top, the invisibility was hard. And I had a lot of my supporters that would send me messages that were like, I tried to Google you and I couldn't even find you. You show up on Ballotpedia, but you're not anywhere in the article. So that was surreal and that was hard. The television stations were a little bit more egalitarian. They gave everybody sort of a little snippet, and they covered all the candidates that made the ballot, which was I thought to be pretty respectful. They didn't maybe cover me to the same extent as they covered the Democrat and the Republican. I think that was understandable. I expected to have to earn my media. A lot of the newspapers, so the local one, the Sun Journal, did do a profile in each candidate, but the Press Herald and the Bangor Daily News, which are the 2 big papers, just didn't cover me. it was shocking, and I would call them out on social media, and there's nothing changed. So I think that was hard. A lot of the national level ones, like Nate from 538, I was kind of giving them grief on social media back in June when I said this race is going to be decided by ranked choice voting, and it's going to be decided by the people who vote for me. So you should probably find out what they want, because you're going to look a lot better, if you understand exactly how this race is going to come out. And I was just ignored and ignored and ignored. I was called a side note. They just wouldn't cover me. And then indeed, when you saw the coverage that came out nationally about ranked choice voting and the race I was in specifically, my picture was on Rachel Maddow a couple times, which my mom, got excited about. And I got a few calls about, and no one covered the people who were determining the votes. And this is bigger than a just me thing, and it's bigger than a just women thing. The sort of people that vote for candidates like me are who determine any close race in America right now. And that's a group of people that never gets covered. And that's just shocking to me, because they're determining the outcome of these huge elections in that are our future, that are the way that our country runs. We'll cover people who, are Trump supporters, or we'll cover people who are pissed off Democrats. But what we don't cover is the people who feel left behind by both parties and are really looking for something different, the people who are on those margins. And that's, I think, how we start getting back to a place where we have more civil discussions, to say there's these people in the middle that can see that there's a problem. And they can see it in perhaps a less dramatic way than either party. I think it's really easy to get pulled into your team, right? I watched Republicans that I knew get pulled into activities and behaviors that they wouldn't do other years because their team was doing that. And I watched Democrats do the same thing. And I watched the people in the middle. And these were people who voted for me. I watched them say, this isn't the path we want to go down. We don't want to engage in this tribalism. We don't want to engage in making this petty and bazinga and reality show TV politics. We don't want this. And I think that's how we get back to finding our centering and our ground. And I think the only way that we fix that is every time we see a candidate who's a good, decent, functional, intelligent, well-spoken candidate that seems ethical and would do the job well, call your papers, call your news, say, why aren't you covering this person? This is the news I want to see, because we're boring. I mean, I'm a really boring candidate. What are you going to say? Tiffany Bond reads federal law. Like, that's a horrible commercial. That's exactly what we need, but it's a horrible commercial, right? Tiffany Bond, might pay her utility bills a little slow sometimes, but generally pays her bills on time and is very responsible with other people's money, right? Who wants to see that commercial? The most salacious things that you can come up with about me are maybe a parking ticket from 5 years ago that I forgot to pay or something, They want the affairs and the scandals and the drama and who bought that person with corporate money. And it's so much more interesting than, if you watch my social media, she fed her children an hour too late yesterday. That was really a tragedy. And nobody wants that. But that's what we need. What we want and what we need aren't the same thing. So we need to demand what we need. We haven't been having enough media vegetables, right? We're living on a cotton candy Kardashian diet, and it's killing us. It's literally and figuratively killing us. It's how we got in a place where we don't work on climate change. It's how all of these issues that should be totally not partisan. Healthcare should not be partisan. Maybe how we pay for it is partisan. Healthcare should not be partisan. Whether or not we are addressing climate change is not partisan. Net neutrality is not partisan. Rural broadband is not partisan. International relations and being a functional member of a global community is not a partisan endeavor. Our military is not partisan. How we treat our vets is not partisan. So we've got all these not partisan issues that we're allowing to be made partisan right now, and it's killing our country.
And do you think you'll run again?
I don't know. It's hard for me. I don't know who's going to be running in future races. I do have some people trying to get me to run against Susan Collins, and some people who want me to run against Jared Golden, the person who won, because they really did want me in that role. But, I have not even 10,000 followers on Twitter, for example. And if you're putting me up against somebody like Susan Collins, who has 480 something thousand followers, it's going to be hard for me to get the support to take that on. And I think if you're looking at a contender like Susan Collins, I don't know if there are any Democrats in Maine that could really beat her either. She's a very robust candidate. And I think you see a lot of that on social media where people are saying, oh, this person's going down. That's just not how politics fundamentally works. And I think we don't have a lot of people that are realistic about the amount of energy that goes into a run, on top of having a hard time getting media coverage, which at some point in time just became a sitcom, right? At some point in time, it just became so-and-so didn't cover me. Because of course they didn't cover me, insert laugh track. It became comical. It was so bad. There's a lot of demands that we put on candidates that are not functional. I, as a campaign choice, decided that I generally did not campaign away from my family on weekends unless I had a debate or something scheduled. And I had a lot of people tell me, you should be out knocking doors. And I'm like, is that what we expect? Do we expect people who have families to never see their family? That's a horrible thing to want from a candidate. If you expect them to emotionally detach from all the things they love about what they're fighting for, you're going to have a really, really bad Congress. right? Is our expectation that people work 20 hours a day to go get elected? Because you're going to have a really bad Congress if you keep that expectation. It's totally unsustainable. And so you're going to end up in a situation where either they burn out and give up, or you're going to end up in a situation where people lie to you and pretend they're doing that when they're not. So I think there's some real structural factors we have to fix about the job interviews that we put people through. And I guess that's a really long way to say either I hope that other people will join me in that endeavor in fixing it. And if they do, maybe I'll run again, or maybe I'll feel compelled to run again because nobody else is pointing those things out. But they're important. It's important to have really real conversations about this job and what it does and, you know, how we put people in it, because it's a super important job. So I guess my challenge for your listeners is make sure you're demanding your media cover things well, and make sure you pay attention to boring people, and make sure you have realistic expectations. I was working full time while campaigning, and I was the only one who was. I mean, the incumbent, I have lots of opinions of how much he works or doesn't work, but he was following he's not the only one who does it. He was following the very traditional model of, you know, once you get in office, because it's a 2-year campaign cycle, you basically spend your career fundraising, right? And that leaves very little time for work. If you need to fundraise $1 million a year, and there was, I think, $31 million that went into my race, and only like less than 800 of it was mine. So, you know, if you need to fundraise just $1 million a year, not even all those millions, that would be if you took 2 weeks off a year and worked 50 weeks a year, 40 hours a week. You know, you need to earn a substantial amount per hour just in fundraising, and that's a full-time job. You know, you need to be earning, I think it's $500 an hour to be able to do that job. Yeah, it's $500 an hour for $1 million, right? $500 an hour, no coffee breaks, no downtime, no time to actually do the work of Congress, working 40 hours a week. That's a ton. And that's for $1 million. And again, the race I was in had $31 million worth of resources thrown at it. That's obscene. So I don't really fault him for not working, because that's what the job has become. And then there were 2 other candidates in my race, and neither one of them was working either. The Democrat I know for certain was full-time campaigning. He didn't work. So how do you compete with that? How do you get middle-class people in these roles that understand the impact of these laws in a meaningful way to the rest of us, when the expectation is you have to take a year or 2 off of work, you have to give up your family, and you have to spend every moment beating on people's doors? I think that you don't, right? We need to change the job interview.
Yeah, and I think an overlooked part of the blue wave and the wave of women elected is how few of them are mothers. So we interviewed tons and tons of mothers who were running for Congress, but most of them did not win. And the women who did win were young and single. And I don't think that's a coincidence.
That's not sustainable either. Yeah. I mean, because what if those women want to have families? Right? I mean, you do get an incumbent advantage. And what if we want people who already have families to say, hey, you know, you guys have some great ideas, and there's some great ideas out there. Like, people are very excited about the Green New Deal, and I think that there are some good things about that. But I think if you don't have parents in there, you're going to get a very different worldview. And even if it's just dads who are in there, a mom has a very different worldview. It's a problem. I had, you know, if you asked me 10 years ago before I had children, I would have given you very different answers than I do now, right? I would talk very much about how, oh, you know, I'm happy to work 12 hours a day. I love it. I love my work. And now that I have kids, I'm like, yeah, like, cut it at 9 max unless I've got a trial, because I got to do bedtime duty, right? My children deserve that. All of our children deserve that. All of our children deserve to have somebody that gives them at least a couple of hours a day where they're a priority, and you just can't do that while campaigning. If I had prevailed, ultimately, I would have done basically a timeshare with my husband, right? Like, he would have been the parent on deck Monday through Thursday, and then it would have been the all-mom show all the time that I was home, Friday to Monday and any other off week. So that was the only way we were going to be able to find balance for our family and for our children. We don't think about having working parents. And the bottom line is working parents are who we want in those roles. The thing about Congress is you don't want people that are all retirement age and beyond. And you don't want people that are the youngest person ever. It's nice to have a few young voices. It's nice to have some historical knowledge and wisdom in there. But you're asking people at the peak of their career is really when you want them there. You really want people in their late 30s to early 60s to be the ones in Congress because they have an ability to understand more current technologies, which is not necessarily age-based, but there is an age component to it for a lot of people because it's what you were exposed to going through your life. And you want people to still have the energy to do the job. You also want them to have the wisdom of having some life experience and knowing that things don't work all the time. You need them to have the life experience of knowing what might work. It's no different than looking at a table full of white dudes making decisions about women's health care. Maybe you should have a woman there, right? Maybe we need to have a Congress that better reflects what's going on in our society. And right now we don't. Are there any other questions I can answer for you? I love that I've been on your podcast a couple of times. I love that we become friends through this process. I mean, that's one of the best things about running for office is you end up meeting a lot of people that you just genuinely connect with. And that's wonderful. Like that part is the best part. I mean, the bad part is that sometimes it feels a little bit like you stumbled backstage at Disney World and, you find out that Mickey Mouse is maybe a chain smoker with a Coke habit. But the good part is there's wonderful people you meet along the way too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's totally been the case with podcasting as well. The people we have met through this experience have been incredible. And, I love all the passion, that you're bringing to your race, but also like every candidate we've talked to who's had so many good ideas and so much passion. And of course, not all of them won. Most of the people we talked to did not win. But, I think it's really changing politics for the better. It's moving things in good directions when good people run, even when they don't win.
Yeah, and I mean, that was a lot of what my run was about is I knew I was an unlikely candidate, not just because of the way I just chose to run, because of who I am. And my campaign really was who I am, right? I mean, I was much more transparent on social media. I let a lot more personality through. I was not shiny and polished like everybody else. I, would totally admit to wearing flip-flops on a rainy day and some of my other, mostly trivial failings, but I let a lot more through, and I was very clear on who I was because I wanted to let people know there was somebody like them in the race. It wasn't just a prepackaged, polished box that was put together by a campaign marketing company. When I started, I contemplated kind of doing the more traditional route of fundraising and hiring a campaign manager and going through all that. And I talked to a few people who were campaign managers, and they all wanted to put me in that space, right? They all wanted to put me in the are you like everybody else space. And I didn't want that. I think that the point was to say, look, there is a regular person in this race, right? And this person's just like you. And if we don't have a regular person in every race, then that person we're never going to have regular people in Congress. We're always going to have these polished, shiny vignettes of what they want us to see as a candidate. And we need more of that. We need more people to put their name on the ballot and get engaged. And, it's going to be a small percent that make it through, but eventually enough will if we keep doing that. And I felt like this year was my year that I had to volunteer for that I had to say, look, I have the capacity to do this job. I don't see anybody in the race that has the same skill set that I have. I think we at least need to have the option of that skill set. And 16,552 people voted for me. That's awesome. I don't know 16,552 people. So there's a whole lot of people that took a leap of faith with me that I've never met. And that's fantastic.
Well, thank you for running this year. And thank you for taking some time out at the end of the year here to talk to me. I think it's really exciting what you did, and it's been fun getting to know you in the process.
Yeah, well, always thank you for letting me be overly chatty, which is apparently my personal style.
All right. Well, Happy New Year to you, and thanks for giving us a hopeful note to end the year on.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Wethlin and was created for use by this podcast.